About 2 years ago, I was long-distance dating a guy who was my first love. He loved me too, but unfortunately, due to the long distance and his addiction problems, we had to break it off. As most people react when their first relationship or love ends, they enter weeks of depression or denial. I had trouble sleeping for at least a month. This caused me to be late to work almost every day, and as a result, I received a warning that if I didn't fix my attendance issue, then I would be let go. I immediately forced myself to try to occupy my time with my freelance illustration and really attempted to go to bed early. The first couple of days were rough, but I kept at it. The first night I remember getting work done and sleeping on time was the night it happened. For a bit of backstory, my roommate and I lived in a house separated into 2 separate living spaces. One for our friends that rented the upstairs and one for us downstairs. I figured I should mention this because our windows, for example, were very easily accessible and unfortunately didn't have locks. We also had a backyard that was fenced off, but much like the windows, the fence door was also lock-free. Now to what happened. I was asleep, but due to being a light sleeper and being incredibly heartbroken, I'd easily awoke to the lights coming through the blinds of my bedroom window. Luckily, my bed was adjacent to the window, so they didn't see me. I was still a little foggy from being sleep-deprived and because of the melatonin, but I forced myself up when whispering voices came from the people holding the flashlights. There were at least 3 of them, all wearing black, and began to move towards the fence of our backyard. I immediately began to feel so emotional at being woken up, and my body went into autopilot. I grabbed my phone and box cutter, and I woke up my roommate. I dialed 911 and handed him the phone to tell the police people were attempting to break in. My amazing roommate seemed to understand immediately, despite being shaken awake. I pounded my way to the kitchen where we had a huge window looking into the backyard, and my adrenaline pumped as I saw strangers make their way through the fence, their flashlights bobbing around. It was this moment that triggered me into a fit of tears. Not the cute one drunk going down my cheek kind, but the type where rivers of tears came down my face, making it difficult for me to see. My boyfriend, who I loved, left me. I haven't been able to sleep. The job I love is threatening to fire me, and now these strangers woke me up and are now trying to take what little we have. They began to look through our backyard shed, which, like an idiot, we haven't attached a padlock to. Inside of it was the bike my dad bought for me, the bikes of our friends who lived upstairs, old TVs, and other stuff like that. One of the intruders made their way to our back door when, in a fit of tears and anger, I beat him to it. I flicked our kitchen lights on and swung open the door. The stranger was right in front of me and jumped backward. I started yelling at them about being woken up and depressed, and how dare they try to rob someone who's barely keeping it together. I was essentially yelling to no one after a couple of seconds because they booked it as soon as I confronted them. The police came, took our statements, asked for descriptions, and said they'd look around. They never found anyone, probably because I didn't follow the strangers to see how they got to our place. If so, I could have gotten the license plate or something. It didn't occur to me until afterwards that I should have told them the police are coming or worry that they might have to hurt me and, more importantly, my roommate. Looking back, I feel really bad about risking our lives like that. I really don't know what came over me, but I was holding in so much sadness and anger that these people caused me to let it out. Anyway, that's what happened. I learned a lot since then, like having our landlord install locks for our windows. It may have worked out for me, but to anyone listening to this, please don't be as stupid as me, especially if there are other people whose lives are at stake. I should have waited inside for the police or yelled at them through the window, but I didn't. So yeah, if the people who tried to break into our home are listening to this, I hope we never encounter each other again. Shortly after I started dating my now ex Danny, he introduced me to his best friend, Andrea. Now, he told me she had depression issues and thought we would get along. I suffer from OCD, which brings on depression if not managed. I've got a couple of relatives who suffer from mental conditions, including a few who have depression, so I'm both familiar with and sympathetic to people whose brains have turned against them. I knew something was a bit off when I found out he had to call her once a week, or he just said he had to, the way someone would say they had to not use the stall right next to an occupied one. Having been cheated on in the past, I was a little uncomfortable with this, but then I actually met her. She was nice enough when I spoke to her on the phone and seemed to be okay when I physically met her at the airport. She lived in another state, by the way. First off, she smoked so much pot that even the subreddit trees would have suggested she slowed down a bit. I've not got a problem with pot, but nearly every breath she took was filtered through a pipe. She kept accusing her boyfriend of cheating on her, something that she'd done to him a few times. She would alternate from flat out refusing to leave the apartment or breaking down in public and bitching about her parents. I could understand the paranoia, though I hadn't known she cheated on him, and I knew how much random crying sucked. She'd come to visit for 4 days but ended up staying for 3 weeks. It was annoying because she would not get off our computer, and she kept asking us to turn the volume down on the TV so that she wasn't distracted, refreshing Facebook. At the end of the visit, I just wanted her gone. I was so tired of the constant drama and wanted some calm in my life again. I held no ill will towards her at this point, since I figured I didn't know her full story and that she's just going through some stuff. After she left, I was on the have to call once a week list, and I learned why it was necessary. I'd get a raving call if I missed a week about how I'm a bad friend and need to stop being selfish. She's depressed and can have a bounce of wanting to end herself, and how would I like it if I was the reason she did it to herself? So I went to my boyfriend after I assured her about 40 times that I hadn't called because I'd been busy, which was true and wasn't true. I learned her history. If she wanted to hang out and you said no, she would threaten to end it all. Before you called her bluff, she'd take a bunch of pills and slash or slice her wrists up. When she'd argue with you in person, she'd take a knife and stab herself. She'd been on pretty much every antidepressant or anti-anxiety drug. She'd gotten really paranoid and thought a few of her friends were making websites to mess with her and even had evidence showing similarities. She'd been in and out of an institution. I hate the word friend zone, but that's what she did to her guy friends. She knew of their crushes, told them she wasn't interested, but then would give them lap dances at parties, let them take shots out of her cleavage, that kind of thing. As mentioned above, she has cheated on her boyfriend many times over. I grew to realize how truly manipulative she was when the required calls became daily ones, and she would be all sweet and saccharine 1 minute, then give Slee insults the next. She had Danny wrapped around her finger, fluffing his ego, then telling him he was only dating me because I was the only one who would have him. It was abuse. Before Danny, I had an ex who would do just this thing and much more, so I knew the signs. I told Danny this, and he seemed relieved, and we figured together he'd tell her for a while he'd like to only talk once a month until she got help. Well, then the next day, I get some phone calls from strangers from all over the world. The first guy told me he'd seen my number, address, and name on eBaum's World, posted by an anonymous person urging people to harass me and said I'm stupid, ugly, fat, and whatever else. I'm going to take a minute to point out how generally nice people are. All but one guy had only called and texted me to give me a heads up, and some even said they'd flagged the post for the admin. The fact that only 1 out of the hundreds of people who saw it had given in to the harassment, and the 14 other calls I got were people who'd given up a small portion of their day to warn the offended party. It just shows that there are a lot of good people out there. Anyway, I sent a message to the admins at eBaum's and then called Andre because I wasn't stupid and knew only one person who would do that. I told her if she didn't take that post down immediately, I would press harassment charges and be sure to inform the very conservative police in her state, known for being very hard on weed, that she had a bunch in her house. Either the site or she took the post down. I've never heard from her since, thankfully. I'm glad. 12 years ago, we moved into a very haunted apartment. For context, I will need to go further back in the timeline, as my stepson was a huge component of the story. These stories about my stepson were related to me from my husband. I believe my stepson, as a child, was sensitive to ghosts, paranormal, and whatever else. An accident happened when my stepson was a baby at another haunted apartment, where he woke up in the middle of the night crying like he was hurt in his crib. My husband and his mom noticed 3 scratches on his back. Of course, this can be explained, yet my husband insisted that those scratches were not there prior to putting him to sleep. Another strange phenomenon is that almost every photo of my stepson had some orb near him. Of course, this can be explained, yet there were photos of just his foot in the background and a well-placed orb near his foot. No matter the location of the photo, 90% of the photos we had of him had this weird orb. Now, jumping back to 12 years ago, we had found an apartment to rent. We had terrible credit, and the landlord gave us a chance. We were excited as the apartment was in a relatively decent part of town, and also to be getting our own space as we'd been living with my mom. One thing I remember when the landlord first showed us the apartment is that he said he had to do extensive renovations to it as the previous tenants destroyed the place. The first month, I started noticing small shadows from the 2 bedrooms out of the corner of my eyes. I chalked it up to just exhaustion because I had my then 1-year-old son. Things grew more intense when I put my 1-year-old down for a nap and decided to shower. I left the door open that led from the single bathroom to my bedroom just in case my 1-year-old woke up. As I was showering, I felt as though someone was watching me. When I opened my eyes, I saw a black shadow run past the door. My 1-year-old started crying hysterically. I got out of the shower and looked around the house, convinced someone broke in. I checked the front door, and everything was locked. A month or so passed from this incident. My 2 stepkids, 7 and 8 at the time, would come 1 day a week on some weekends. Their room was relatively unused. I started hearing their sliding wood closet doors knock and a strange rotten egg smell coming from their room. I searched high and low for the source of the smell, but I never found anything. My mother-in-law had stayed over a few times and would tease that the kids must have left an egg salad sandwich somewhere. My husband heard the knocking at some point, yet chalked it up to the air conditioning kicking on. One weekend, my husband was out of town for work, and I was alone with all the kids. I had gotten them all to sleep and had decided to stay up and watch Ghost Adventures. I was laying on the couch when I happened to look up and see my stepson standing by the couch with his eyes closed. I immediately realized he was sleepwalking, which happened from time to time. He started mumbling about an old scary man in his closet. I stupidly figured he was having a nightmare and guided him back to his bed. As I started to walk out of the room, my stepson sat up in bed and mumbled again, "The old man in the closet is looking at me." I looked over to see the closet open and instantly got creeped out. Then my stepson said, "He's going to knock." Then 3 quick knocks happened. Immediately, the smell of rotten eggs got heavy in the room. I flicked the lights on and guided my stepson to my bedroom. I was freaking out internally because my stepdaughter was on the bunk in that room sleeping, and I did not want to leave her alone. I got all the kids into my bed and stayed up until I no longer could fight sleep. I'm not really religious, but I asked my mother for some advice on what to do. She said to pray over the rooms and get oil on my fingers and place crosses over each door frame. I did exactly what she told me to. That night, I had a terrible nightmare that my mom was possessed. In the nightmare, she had died a gruesome death that I was meant to watch. I woke up hysterically crying. I wanted nothing more than to be able to just move, but it was not an option. After this, the activity in the apartment calmed, yet one new thing started happening. One night, I woke up to my bed shaking. It felt as though someone had placed their knees against our mattress and was shaking it. As soon as I tried to wake my husband up to see if he felt it, it would immediately stop. This would happen weekly. For context, my 1-year-old son slept in a toddler bed in front of our bed. One night, my 1-year-old and I were up in the living room. My husband went to bed early as he had to go to work early the next day. He came out looking upset and said to stop allowing our 1-year-old to come into the room because he was shaking the bed. I told him our son never went into the room. As soon as I finished that sentence, the glass cover to the entryway light, which was right behind me, came crashing down. My husband stood there sleepily trying to process everything. He finally was feeling and seeing the things I'd been dealing with. One day, a house nearby was for rent, and we moved out. We were at this apartment for less than a year. We never experienced anything like what we'd experienced in that apartment. I felt relieved because I was worried that whatever was in this place might attach itself to us. My stepson passed away in 2019 due to possible CO. I had told him the story prior to his passing when he was in his teens, and he claimed to not remember the incident in the apartment. I'd fully believe he saw whatever entity was in that apartment.